Hey guys, it's Danny. Excuse my voice, it's early morning, but today we are going to repot a Polychilos type Phalaenopsis. Recently there has been quite a lot more interest in Polychilos or novelty hybrid Phalaenopsis on my channel. And I just happened to have a brand new one that was sent to me by lovely Maya here on, not here on YouTube, a very long time subscriber, a wonderful person, and I'm so very grateful for it. Thank you so much, Maya, for sending it to me. I thought it's a great opportunity to repot it together and give you some tips about Polychilos hybrids and novelty hybrids and so on. So we are going to do not a repot and chill actually. We are actually going to talk about these orchids and hopefully I'm going to give you some growing tips and repotting tips along the way. So let's just get to it. First of all, who is this orchid? It is a Phalaenopsis Liuline Blue Jenny crossed with Phalaenopsis Liuline Blue Jenny. I don't know if it's one of those cross-self type of hybrids, but yeah, this is who she is. I checked out photos and the flowers might be either white and purple, either purple. I'm not entirely sure. It's gonna be a very interesting hybrid because it has the tetraspis in its parentage. So the flowers can actually be different from each other. If you're aware or if you're acquainted with the tetraspis, you know that it always produces different flowers. It can have red and white alternative petals or just red or just white. Beautiful Phalaenopsis. I really like it. So I'm very curious how this one will be. Righty then. So I have my gear here. I washed everything. And first and foremost, whenever you are going to receive a Polychilos type Phalaenopsis, it is a very good idea to wet its potting medium because most of the times it will come in sphagnum moss. These guys are not flower shop Phalaenopsis, they are nursery Phalaenopsis, and typically they're imported, I would say, from Asian countries, where actually these guys are native from. And I do see that typically these nurseries pot them in one of these very flimsy pots that cannot be reused, but also in sphagnum moss. Now you could get one in bark and sphagnum moss or just bark, it happens, but most of the times I find that you get them in sphagnum moss. And to safely remove Phalaenopsis from sphagnum moss, you need to properly soak them. So you can see here that the roots of my orchid are absolutely green. This has been soaked. It is now time to unpot them. So as I was saying, they come in these flimsy pots that cannot really be reused. They're way too flimsy. I don't know. No, I'm not gonna reuse this. And the sphagnum moss is tight. I have never seen tighter sphagnum moss, but that's okay. They're small pots, so the roots typically don't get suffocated. To break down this ball of moss, I find that sometimes a tweezers or a long nose tweezers is very helpful. Mine are all downstairs with the aquariums and I'm a little lazy to get them, so I'm gonna try to do this by hand. If I find my fingers are a little, too big for the procedure, I'm gonna go get them. But let's just try without them. I'm assuming not many of you have those aquascaping tweezers, so let's just try to do this by hand. It will be very tight, so take your time and just remove strand by strand like this. The good news is that if you're purchasing a smaller Phalaenopsis like this, it will also be a small root ball. Now with these orchids, don't be afraid to purchase young orchids such as this. And actually most of the times you will find them sold at a very young age. These types of Phalaenopsis, together with the normal ones as well, can actually bloom at a young age. Will you have the full display? Probably not, but novelty Phalaenopsis and Polychilos hybrids don't create those cascading flowers like the flower shop Phalaenopsis do. It's a very different subgenus, looks a little different. So when they are young, they can actually produce 1-2 flowers for you, but it's not a big deal because typically these orchids don't produce a lot of flowers. So with these guys, it doesn't even matter because they're not as showy as the other types of Phalaenopsis, but definitely the flowers are, in my opinion, more saturated or more colorful. They're also fragrant many of the times and they have a sturdier, waxier appearance to them. They're not as floofy. So I actually managed to remove all of this sphagnum moss. I broke one of the roots, but it was holding on by a little thread. Sometimes it happens. It's okay. These guys are actually very strong orchids, just like the other Phalaenopsis are. So you can see on their roots, they look a little bit different than your typical Phalaenopsis. They're greener, the roots are maybe not as thick, and it's not an age thing. Typically, the roots on these types of orchids are not as vigorous, are not as fleshy as on a flower shop Phalaenopsis. Also, I find that these orchids tend to not produce as many roots as fast. In the end, yes, you can have a pot full of roots, even with these Phalaenopsis as well. But they don't seem, generally, they don't seem to grow as fast as the other Phalaenopsis. Now, of course, there are always exceptions, but I'm trying to generalize a little bit things for you. As such, I shall not be using a very, very big pot. It takes more time for an orchid, like for a novelty hybrid, to fill a pot. So this size is absolutely perfect. You can see we have ample room here. One thing you shouldn't do is use the same pot, even if your orchid, let's say, suffered root loss, right? There's that rule that says, choose your pots according to the roots. Now with these guys, I don't typically use it as a rule, never, but especially with these guys, they're still Phalaenopsis. They will grow roots pretty vigorously. And second, the roots of these types of Phalaenopsis really appreciate a more moist environment. Are they drought tolerant? Of course, but they are much more tolerant and actually love a more moist environment around them. They grow faster in my experience, or they don't stop growing as much if you keep them just mildly more humid or damp than your typical flower shop Phalaenopsis. So putting them in the same pot, you know, it fits, yes, but it makes no sense. It will outgrow it in a matter of months. This is way too small. And also, it will make you water way too often. And you're gonna find that gets old pretty fast. No matter how much time you have to water, doing the same thing repetitively over and over and over again every 2 days or so, it's gonna get old. It's gonna get really frustrating. So it's important in this hobby to not turn something you love into a chore, into something you dread doing, you know? So go for a bigger pot with any type of Phalaenopsis. Now, as for medium, do you have to use sphagnum moss? Not necessarily. If you enjoy sphagnum moss, if it works well in your environment, use it. These are the perfect orchids to use sphagnum moss with. But if sphagnum moss stays a little too damp in your area, definitely bark or a combination of bark and sphagnum moss will do good. Now, I would advise you, I would give you a tip. When you first get one of these Phalaenopsis and you take it out of moss, do not put it in bark and just bark or any non-water retentive material. These roots are already adjusted to very high moisture environments. They're probably not gonna like being that dry. In time, if you prefer your orchids more on the dry side, you can gradually adjust the new roots to drier conditions. But these roots that have already grown, they're accustomed to very moist conditions. So either do a combination of moss and bark, either use sphagnum moss if it works for you, but do not skip the moss. They can lose roots if the environment suddenly changes, just like any other orchid. So being that this is a small orchid, it's a young orchid, it doesn't have so many structures, it's gonna be a little bit more sensitive and prone to being dehydrated. So no matter the case, use some more water retentive materials, or if you really insist on putting it in bark or mounting it, make sure that for a while you water it abundantly. Make sure that the roots don't dry or don't stay dry for way too long. You can like spritz it 5 times a day. If the roots get dry in 5 minutes and in between your spritz they're dry for 4 hours, it's not okay. They are adjusted to being wet for an extended period of time, and they will not take well to extreme dry conditions all of a sudden. Right, so I'm gonna go for a combination of moss and bark. I could go for just moss, but I'm going to be more mindful with how I spend my moss. It's not really something I find locally, but I will make sure to add quite a bit of moss to this mixture. Partly because it does well in my warm and dry environment, partly because I do not want to shock these roots with an extremely dry environment all of a sudden. Righty, so let's place the orchid and try to arrange it at the same level it was in the previous pot. So don't bury it, of course. It works on the same principles as the other Phalaenopsis. Try not to bury the stems, and all of the leaves, including the first set of leaves, should always be on top of the medium. Even if it likes moisture, it's still an epiphytic orchid, and it still has the sensitivities that all other Phalaenopsis have, which is stem rot and crown rot. Remember, we are in a home environment, and it just doesn't work the same as an outdoors environment, particularly if we don't have the same climate and environment as their natural habitat. Now, mine here is a hybrid. I'm not entirely sure how complex it is. It could actually have some Phalaenopsis subgenus in it as well, but it is displaying at least more of the Polychilos traits. We have those green roots that are not as fleshy, are not as gray when they're dry. We have the very glossy leaves, and we have a lighter color. This lighter color of the leaves is another trait some Polychilos Phalaenopsis have. Don't be scared if your Polychilos or novelty hybrids always will be paler than the flower shop Phalaenopsis. They are different subgenera within the same genus, but because their ancestors' leaves looked different, obviously the hybrids will take after the ancestors as well. And in this case, most, if not all of their ancestors do not have dark leaves. Oh, I'm lying. No, there is one. There is one that can have dark leaves, but they start out very lime green like this, and then they have a lot of anthocyanin. So it's different. Once you have them side by side, you will notice that the color is very different. It's not that it's deficient. Don't over fertilize it. It's normal for these guys to have a lighter color. What's not normal for them is to have yellow leaves. And by the way, I'll make a little side note. Because I'm filming in the morning, I'm using the upper light. Can we see the well, almost the shadows are straight on the table. Yeah, I'm using the uplight, which is a yellow spectrum light. I love yellow. Throughout my house, I have amber lights, not very amber, but like warm toned lights, because it makes me feel good, including this room. So because I'm using the yellow light above, everything looks a little bit more yellow. And yeah, so leaves are not supposed to be yellow, but they are a apple green, I would say, in many cases with these types of orchids. Now, just like your other Phalaenopsis, these guys are heavier feeders as well, and they will appreciate slow release, which is what I'm using here. You will also find sometimes that they already have slow release fertilizer in their pots. Maybe not the younger orchids like this, but the bigger orchids that are potted in a bigger pot, sometimes you will notice the beads of slow release. So again, don't be afraid to fertilize properly these orchids. They are heavier feeders, not to the extent of the other Phalaenopsis, which obviously they're bigger, they grow bigger flowers, right? But they, I would say, are heavier feeders than an Oncidium, really. So I am still using, even with this younger Phalaenopsis, I am still using slow release fertilizer. You don't have to, but I cannot be consistent with the water soluble fertilizer, and sometimes it doesn't end good with Phalaenopsis, so that's why I'm using it. And yes, you can use slow release with the water-soluble fertilizer as well, especially if you know you're not consistent with preparing the fertilized water. You can also use the slow release on its own and not to use water-soluble fertilizer, but you have to be careful to replenish the slow release. On the label of any slow release fertilizer, you will see the release time. Let's say some release for 3 months, some for 6 or 9 months. What I do is I try to replenish it once a year, even though I do still use water-soluble fertilizer. But if you don't use any other type of fertilizer, it's important to replenish it at least once a year, I would say. Typically, it says on the label, so check the label and respect the instructions of the label, because each fertilizer can be a little bit different. I'm using Osmocote because I cannot find MSU in my area, and importing the MSU from rePotme, not a good idea. In my country, I'm in the EU. Right, so we are done. Just like with other Phalaenopsis, these guys do appreciate an airy medium as well. They're epiphytic. Even if they come compacted like this, it doesn't mean you have to compact them as well, because we're putting them in bigger pots. Our environment might be way different than the nursery they came from. So it's always good to keep things airy. And I hope you can see in my pot, if I press a little bit, everything is very fluffy, very airy. With sphagnum moss, you do not need to compact it to retain water. And actually, if you compact it, you're removing the spaces and air pockets from in between the strands, which does two things. One, it suffocates orchids or roots, and second, it reduces the quantity of water this medium can hold. Not by a whole lot, but it reduces it. So in order to have this orchid moist for longer and also not suffocate the roots, it's always a good idea to make the sphagnum moss fluffy. No matter your environment, no matter the instance, never compact sphagnum moss. You're taking away from its wonderful characteristics and you're putting your orchid's roots at risk. So the fluffier, the better. Right, so what we're gonna do now is I'm gonna actually go water this orchid. I'm gonna do so downstairs with non-softened water. I softened the water in my house with sodium chloride, which is salt, and it's not good for orchids, so I'm gonna go downstairs. I'm also gonna write the date of repotting here. So it's May 25. And this orchid is coming from Liulin Orchids. This is the nursery. And I'm not entirely sure if it's from Thailand or, I'm not very well versed with the dialects and the languages. But I would say definitely it looks like it's an Asian language. So as I was saying, these guys usually come from Asian nurseries because they are the leading nurseries in production or reproduction even of Novelty Phalaenopsis and Polychilos Phalaenopsis. They're native from those areas. They have the perfect climate from them, and most of the times they're also the best looking Phalaenopsis. Right, so I'm gonna clean up my area here, put back the medium that I didn't use, and we'll come back with the outro. Alright, here we are. Our orchid is watered. When should you re-water this orchid? Well, I would say that as long as it doesn't have new roots growing, just make sure it doesn't completely stay bone dry for more than 3 days or so. I would not let it actually go bone dry because again, these roots are not adapted to that. So as long as you don't have new roots, water it just before it goes completely bone dry. You're not gonna rot anything. You're actually gonna maintain the old roots in proper condition. When you see new roots growing, you can start piping down on this watering regime and adjust the new roots to, let's say, more of a droughty situation. It's gonna happen in time. If you like watering and you're comfortable to keep them slightly moist all the time, you can absolutely do that, but for ease of use and emergency situations, it's a good idea to adapt it to the same schedule as your other Phalaenopsis orchids. But at the beginning, when you don't have new roots, and especially when the orchid tries to get established in your environment, keep it a little bit more on the moist side, I would say. Also, all of the other rules apply to this orchid as well. Try not to leave water in the stem or in the crown. I don't find them to be more resilient to crown rot or things that usually happen in cultivation in our homes. So make sure that you don't expose it to rotting situations. It doesn't need misting, it doesn't need higher humidity, nothing of the sorts. It's just as easy as all of the other Phalaenopsis orchids. Very, very well suited for home growing as well, luckily for us. And just treat it like all of your other Phalaenopsis orchids. Light, again, they're not highlight orchids. Put it in the same conditions as your other Phalaenopsis. With these ones, you don't need to offer a temperature drop in the winter. You can keep it warm all of the time. And with these guys, the warmer you keep them, the better. They will have continuous growth, and at some point, they will also bloom. Right, so with that said, I hope I managed to touch on as many important details as possible. From now on, just treat it like any other Phalaenopsis, and I hope you have great success with these guys. They are truly wonderful, and more hybrids are becoming available. Will they be available in flower shop? Maybe not anytime soon. Maybe you're gonna see 1, 2 I saw them, but your best bet if you're looking for these types of Phalaenopsis is orchid nurseries in your area. All you have to do is Google for one. Right, so with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this video and you learned something new. And with that said, I'll see you all next time. Bye!